Hey, Joe, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
My name is Joe Giardina. I've been in sales my whole career. As a young man, I was always a great student, pretty tenacious internal competitor. I always had the desire to learn new things and sharpen some kind of skill. And those things have always been with me. So they've been a blessing and also the vehicle that seems to get me in trouble the most. But somewhere in the teenage years, I think this turned into a drive to learn more about people and how they think and how decisions are made, leadership type deal. And just really haven't shaken that off since. By the time I got to college, this has taken most of my attention. I was a business major, luckily. Um, but I didn't really know how to put this focus into learning about how people think and what career is that going to fit into. And unfortunately, once you dig the hole of business administration, you're 3 years deep. um, the options get limited. I didn't really have a great network, so working a lot of side time jobs and things like that, and eventually realized I was having way too much fun in college, and
Yeah,
had to get
you got to
into
pay
something to
for it.
get yeah, exactly. So and took an entry level sales job, and from there it was a really bare bones start. Had to take the bus to work. Sometimes had to take emergency taxis, which I couldn't afford. And from that point on, I got really lucky. I had some really great mentors. Worked for some really great companies. Got lucky, hooked up with some great startups, and I've come full circle. You know, I found that unlimited source of studying people, the leadership roles, how decisions are made, all of that in sales. So I really couldn't imagine myself anywhere else.
So it sounds like you like the cerebral part of it.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. More than
Yeah,
the
I
money,
think
or is that both?
that's a trick question. I love the money. I think it comes with it, but my thought process on the cerebral part is, anybody could be good at telling somebody what they should think or how they should buy, but understanding what goes into the process is the X factor. That's, what gets the second sale, the third sale, the repeated sales thereon after. And when you're selling something like building materials or a product or what have you, those become the most important aspect of the operation. Why is this guy loyal to his vendors? Why does he go back even if they mess up? Like things like that you learn as a young man, and then they translate into, a little bit later on, you kind of put the full piece together. So, each piece of the cerebral part kind of shifts as I mature with time. But early on, it was certainly, the whys more so than the hows, I guess.
Yeah. The whys on their side or the whys on your side, or both?
Definitely both. But in the beginning, I'm really focused on the money. And I guess if you asked the 25-year-old version of me, it would be, oh, I'm only focused on what is on their side. But, as you realize you're not the greatest thing ever invented and you're not the best salesperson in the world, you got to start asking those internal questions as well.
And what did you find on the why on the client side? Because you brought up the X factor. What does all that mean to you?
I think, the first thing you always want to find your stride in sales, like how should I sound? What's gonna separate me? And I think what I landed on is I need to figure out how I would want to be sold to. Like what would sound good to me? What would be the most genuine way that I would be appealed to if I was in the buyer's chair? So that was a lesson I learned really early on. And once I started asking those questions, it didn't really, I don't want to say it didn't matter who I sold to, there's still challenges, but it got a little bit easier for me to understand how to sound, how to sell. And I came off a lot more genuine, more so than car salesman, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
worst fear of a salesperson is sounding like a used car salesman. Everybody gets labeled that. So how do I appeal to somebody in the most genuine way and make sure they know that I'm here to work with them through the sales process, because it is a process, right? Like there's a set of operations that go into this. how do I fit into this when that process is already fulfilled for them? I'm not inventing anything new. I don't have patents. I'm here to sell a widget. I'm here to sell something they're already buying. How would I appeal, or how would I be appealed to if I was in their role? And I found that that was the best way to get through that first line of questioning, that first set of cold calls, etc. And it was the healthiest baseline for me to set with customers and clients.
And how do they want to be approached?
I think they just don't, from a very bare bones, if I give you a one sentence answer, I think they want to be treated with honesty, and they want to know that you have a plan, and they want to know that you have your things together, because they're giving you trust. They're giving you a part of their operation, and they're relying on you to make sure that that part gets done. The worst thing that could happen in a buyer's perspective is they authorize a purchase of some kind and it doesn't get fulfilled the way that they envisioned it. So, going back to the beginning, if I was in their chair, I want to know the plan and what I'm buying, exactly how long it's going to take, all of those details, and setting that expectation clear. And then along the process, whether it's the sale is going to show up the next day, or it's a 30-day process, or 60, whatever you have, just making sure that I'm not in the dark. Um, and I think those things could really only be learned by failing a few times and then getting that batch of humility of like, wow, I'm not doing what's best for my customer. I need to look in the mirror. How would I like to be sold to if I was them? And that's kind of how, I landed on that methodology.
But I also got to imagine that sometimes they want something, but you're smart enough to know that that want isn't going to satisfy the need. And
Sure. You can't be afraid to tell them it's not possible, or to set their expectations right again. And I think that just goes back to the honesty and having a plan, and making sure you're a person who abides by those parameters when you set them. So it all comes down to, you know, I really believe the honesty and having a plan and sticking to the plan as best as you can. And that baseline is just healthy to go back to every time you have a conversation with the client or a prospect. Here's what we said last time. Unfortunately, there was a change. This is the new plan moving forward as of right now. Every time I hang up the phone with somebody, I want to make sure they feel comfortable knowing where they are. I never want to hang up the phone leaving somebody confused, because that puts their money in jeopardy, the operation in jeopardy, and all sorts of questions start after that. And, at that point, you, as a salesperson, account manager, whatever, you seem less valuable, right? You don't know what's going on. You need to go back. You're not prepared. So I try to eliminate those things before they happen by being prepared and having the plan. But in the event where I don't have an answer, I always default to honesty. And, you know, sometimes it's okay to hang up the phone and say, hey, I'll get back to you, Brian.
yeah. Oh, what's the hardest part of your job?
I think the hardest part is, sometimes, you're let's say your means of improving something, or the in the huddle type conversations where things aren't going right and you're losing by 30 points. Sometimes those aren't received as well as you would like them to be. And early on in my career, I wish I knew that, there was an emotional aspect to being a challenger and to being somebody who, you know, wants to target the status quo and bring new ideas. Um, and I don't think I'll ever be able to really shake that off. I'm always trying to find a new way to make money, or a new way to dig up prospects or opportunities. And sometimes it just isn't well received. It could be seen as a waste of time. It could be seen as something that, we've always done it this way, so to speak. Why is Joe going right when we're going straight? And I think that for me personally is a difficult challenge, because it drives me. It makes me motivated. It gets me excited to go find new things, but not everybody's wired that way.
And how have you managed around that?
I think in the early ons, I managed it pretty
Pretty bad.
poorly, to be honest. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I will be the first to admit that. I definitely was more aggressive than I should have been on certain ideas. And at a certain point, it doesn't even matter what you're saying, if you're saying it in a panic or you're, you know, the it's the wolf, the boy who cried wolf sometimes, and you could make a lot of sense. You could have a great plan. You can have customer feedback. You can have it all. But if you're saying it in an all haphazard way, people are going to focus on how you say something more so than what you're saying. And
Yeah.
I think that was the hardest part for me early on. And sometimes I even struggle with that now because it's, you're excited. You find a new idea. That's a great thing to find as a salesperson, like, hey, look, there's revenue that we didn't know about. Let's go get it. And, it's hard to have your methodology and how you feel cast onto other people right away. It's just
Right.
that connection isn't made right away.
Yeah. And who's the persona that you're selling to? What's their title?
Right now it's usually engineers, architects. I mean, building materials, you start at the specification, and then everything kind of trickles down. So every once in a while, in like a design or aesthetics focused type role, you might have an audience with the owner, but for the most part, contractors, building materials, buyers, distributors, architects, engineers, contractors, that sort of thing. That's been the core focus of my salaried career. And then on the side, I've had, a few startups that I've been involved in, some consultation work as well.
And I got to believe the biggest challenge is getting them focused on value versus cost.
I think they're focused on both, but you're juggling that, or your hand is on that dial, right? Like
Yeah.
the term that no one ever wants to hear is, Joe, you're being value engineered. And that means, look, we like your product, but we're going to find a better alternative, or the value is going to be filled somewhere else. And that almost always knocks down a PO, significantly. So the value sometimes on a shiny product, that's really aesthetics driven, the value is hard to
Build.
get
Yeah.
a yeah, it's not there until the project is done. So the whole process of the project is more focused on nuts and bolts and commodities, and no one really cares what the building's going to look like while it's being built. They
Right.
are building a building. So, sometimes in that aspect, it's a little difficult. But when I'm selling a commodity product that, there's a mile of it in the ceilings and it's holding lighting and things like that, the communication is a little bit easier. It's much more price and availability driven. So lots of competition. You got to be valuable to the product or to the project in a way that's outside of the product. So it's the opposite depending on what you're selling in building materials.
And what's kept you in this space?
I think it's just one of those paths that started to get, paved, and I just kept going and finding success. And, that's a good thing and a bad thing in some ways. It gets frustrating if you hit a rut, but I constantly default back to there's a lot of things that can be improved here. Like there's a lot of wasted time. There's a lot of wasted communication where if I start targeting those things, there's people on the customer end, the buyer seat, that are thinking like me. And once you find one or two of those relationships, it turns into five really quick, and then the book starts to grow really fast. So, you find that you're valuable in ways that you didn't even know about, and it gets harder to walk away from. So
Hmm.
I love going to a job site and it being just an open ground, just dirt. And then coming back 6 months later and my product's getting installed, and then coming back 6 months later and it's a mall like that. That's really cool to be a part of. And that I don't think will ever get boring to me. So I love the aspect of construction. It's one of those things that's always going to be around. And if the construction, maintenance, that sort of contractor segment dries up, I think we're a much bigger
That's
problem
true. Yeah.
globally. So it's a great thermometer for me. And quite frankly, if I were to take a single value out of it, it's made me a better salesperson because the mess ups are so tangible, right? Like if something shows up late or if it's wrong and someone's waiting for it on a job site, any dollar you save them is gone right there. So the value of getting things right and being valuable in that way has made me a better person from a employee, just salesperson perspective. So
And
I think that's what kept me here.
good. And what do you hope your customers say to their friends in the industry?
I I mean, it's the best thing that happens to me is, Joe, I got your phone number from so and so, and they told me that you're the guy to talk to. That is a great day for me. So I want as much of that as possible. And if it's across contractors who may compete, that's even more of a compliment because they're potentially putting their business at risk to hook up their friend. And it turns into a nice little powwow eventually where the conversation goes from, hey, I could sell you this product, I could save you money and blah, 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 to how do we change the market? Like, how do I set a new paradigm here? How do I make sure all of this flows down into my bucket first? And I'll create a whole alternate level playing field rather than all these other variables. You can't set pricing, you can't bid rig and do all that stuff, but you can provide pricing to 4 or 5 different contractors that solicit it. And maybe for those 4 or 5, they would prefer coming to Joe, who does things cleaner and faster and gets me an answer in one day and, sticks to his word. And I can always get Joe on the phone rather than Supply House, who, they get tossed around the phone. They can't get anybody there. So that's sort of, that spread. And I hope they have that conversation, go buy from Joe. Sure. I love that conversation between friends. But what I really would love the next step to be is, we have an opportunity to make things better in this segment, and Joe is a vehicle to help that happen.
Because their problem isn't getting the best price. The problem is getting all the products on the site on time and making sure everything works.
And I think additionally, when something goes wrong, they need a fixer, right? They need that guy to come
The
in
wolf.
and clean up. Exactly. Yeah. I was gonna say the guy from Pulp Fiction. They need the guy to come in and clean it up and get rid of this issue because the clock is ticking.
Yeah.
If there's $100,000 worth of metal sitting on the floor of a building and 20 guys waiting to install it because they don't have the attachment, that's a problem. So, I'm the type of guy that'll just take a pallet of that stuff, throw it in a van and drive it there myself. And, those little things get you to that next level. But, sometimes it's not necessarily a material issue. It's we need Joe, we need you to present on behalf of our company and help us out here. So, they bring in the manufacturer for extra credibility, and credibility is everything in contracting. So, I have no problem getting behind the sled with my customers and pushing in the same direction, whether it's a distributor, a contractor, what have you. And, if things get really messy, I have no problem throwing a glove on and helping them carry stuff up a building. So that's the extra mile, so to speak, that I want to make sure my customers know that about me from day one. And we talked before we went live. Sometimes you get a call at 9:30 at night and, they need something by 5:30 in the morning. It might not be possible, but I'm going to try. And even that goes a long way with them. So it's rewarding in that sense. And it's almost immediate rewarding because you feel like you're part of the job. Like, I'm not on the ladder. I'm not screwing nuts and bolts. I'm not welding anything, but I got the material there. And, I helped make sure that one of these fires was put out. So I think having that part communicated from somebody to their friend before I even do it saves me months of relationship building, right? Like somebody's friend telling them about me gets me to maybe a year in the relationship timeline before I even pick up the phone. So that is an
The trust
ultimate
is
for me.
transferable.
No question about it,
Yeah.
especially in this industry.
And you've made yourself the lockout. The competition
Correct.
doesn't have you.
Correct. So, now from a selfish perspective, your value skyrockets. I can't tell you how many times people have reached out to me about things that I can't help them with, but they just want my opinion or they want a handoff. So now my worth goes even higher because I'm throwing alley-oops to somebody else and they need to return that favor to me. So it just
Yeah.
it swells, and it's all based on good things. It's based on honesty, integrity, and doing the right thing and bringing value to something that needs it. So it's rewarding to have that immediate feedback, but the long-term referrals and the credibility from somebody who you've earned it from, that's the icing on the cake, really.
Yeah. And was this something that you grew up with, or was it something that somebody taught you along the way?
My family always really hardworking people, blue collar, some police officers, a lot of military guys. So lots of, you know, gusto, and the toughness was was always there. I got three brothers, so it was super competitive
Yeah.
and, dare I say, intense. And I think that communication with contractors comes a little bit from that. My one of my favorite uncles had a contracting business his whole life. He passed it off to his son. So there were times where I was on a roof. There were times where I was doing, odd end jobs during the summer. And then one of my other uncles worked for a large big box store where it was more, everyday customer residential oriented. So
Yeah.
I think I've been kind of trained and pushed in this direction without really knowing it. And then now that I found myself here, I have those people to bounce things off of, and it just makes, my mousetraps a little bit more effective. So yes and no. I guess, I wasn't shoved in this direction. I wasn't, given a hammer and a tool belt and shoved on a roof when I was 10 years old and said, this is your job. But I was climbing the ladder and doing it because I was interested and I wanted to hang out with my uncle. So yeah, I guess yes and no would be the answer to that question.
And what do you wish you learned earlier?
We kind of touched on this earlier. Um, I wish I knew that disagreeing with the status quo or challenging it, or even like calling out a need for improvement, uh, they're not going to be received the way that they would be on a sports team or in a tight family or a close group of friends. The rules of engagement are so different in business, especially the more corporate you get. So like as a intense, highly competitive person, I really underestimated the emotional response that would come from being a challenger. It definitely marks you in a way, and sometimes you could create an adversarial stance with somebody that you don't intend to create. You might not even know them, and you don't even know they exist, but they mark you as a threat because, oh, here's this guy talking about things that might make me obsolete, or, I had this idea and
Mm.
we're going in this direction. And there's this guy I've never even heard of making noise. Like sometimes those people you really need on your side to get higher in the corporate ladder and to get your goals materialized. But, you get put in the threat bucket because you're having a good time or, speaking freely with your customer and one of your colleagues. And there's really no way of learning that until you go through it a couple times. So I
Well,
wish I knew that.
yeah, because when that book came out, you know, when it works, you have a healthy debate. When you doesn't work, you have an argument. So you got to be careful there.
No question about it. And I didn't know that as a 25-year-old kid.
Right,
You're
because
walking.
you know you're right, and they just I got to get them to see my way.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's work,
Yeah,
but sometimes that can come off as offensive to somebody because they put 6 months or 8 months into their business plan. And I'm walking in saying, nope, my contractor says this, we should do this. And I'm not even trying to contradict what they're saying. It comes off that way. So that that was a tough lesson to learn. And I wish I knew that earlier. And conversely, sometimes people, have the same idea as you and they're better at communicating it, and you feel like they stole your idea, right? Like that's a emotional response that I wish I dialed back. Always hurts, but the lesson I learned there, and what I wish I knew was, hey, look, if an idea is being brought up, that's a good thing. Like this is what you want, so get behind the sled and push and put your ego aside. And that was a little bit easier for me to learn because it's, look, the momentum's going in that direction. But the other one of maybe the momentum isn't going in that direction, that one was a struggle a couple times for me, and maybe not my better days.
And I got to believe in your space, there's a lot of emotion attached to approach as well.
Yeah, because they're
Identity
commodity.
and
Yeah, they're commodity products, right? So you can't make roofing shingles too sexy, right? There's
no matter how hard you try.
I tried. I tried and I thought I did pretty good, but there's there at the end of the day, there's a certain technical element, and no one really cares about XYZ when their roof is leaking. They need their roof to be fixed. So in that panic, how does that decision made? And just kind of dialing it back to what we talked about earlier, put yourself in the buyer's seat. How do you bring value to somebody who's in a panic and with their house leaking? That's a different sale than, hey, look at these beautiful colors. Like, it's completely different conversation. And unfortunately, my struggle was when I was selling shingles was, like, I want to get that discretionary business. I want to be that default. When people need a shingle, they go straight to this company. So I targeted a lot of that. And, when it comes to the colors and the aesthetics and everything like that, luckily a lot of that's similar, and that's kind of a level playing field. So like I said, there was not a lot of differentiation room. So you had to find that. And then once you find that shred, you try to make it as big as possible, right?
Yeah.
And that was the approach there. But I wish I knew, like I said, I wish I knew that bringing up some new ideas and challenging things sometimes don't go as you intend.
And when you look at your competition or look at customers, I got to believe that within 15 minutes whether they're a good match for you and your company.
No question. You can tell sometimes you can tell before just by the phone call and how easy it is to get somebody to take a meeting, right? Like, if somebody's flying all around and they're juggling their accounting, and they're in issues with their car, and they have all these things, like, chances are they're not going to buy a premium product, right? Like, they're not
Yeah.
going to be interested in the Ferrari in the space. So, yeah, I think pretty quickly in building materials, you can figure it out. There's galleries and portfolios and all that stuff for these companies online, which says a lot about them. But once you have the conversation, get to the decision maker, there's a few quick ways of identifying how this guy's going to buy. And maybe that pushes you to that bucket of, like, all right, this is not for me and this isn't a good fit. Or maybe it's like, I can't sell exactly the way that I should, to this other guy, but for this guy, I could sell him half of what I'm intending. He's not going to be a fit for the entire portfolio, but he's a great fit for one or two pieces. And those types of audibles, you got to call on the fly, right? You got to go in ready with everything, but be willing to cancel out a couple parts of your playbook as you go.
Yeah. And is it mostly inbound?
Well, eventually you get to the point where if you get into a great spot and it's a specification driven building materials sale, you get your name as a basis of design, which is a great situation, because then
Yeah.
a lot of your sales become inbound, and your name is on the paper when everybody's soliciting pricing and putting a bid together. That's fantastic. And that could take 5 years. That could take,
That's all.
who knows, right? To become the basis of design is a golden element to have. But as soon as you get there and you're the king of the mountain, there's 50 people trying to knock you off. So there's a whole other aspect of defense to play there. And as a salesperson, a lot of that's out of your control, because there might be an improvement to somebody else's product. There might be availability issues. There's tons of things that come into this fray that you might get engineered out. For example, like, let's say, your product has resistance against wind for X amount of miles per hour. And then a competitor comes in, theirs is X times two. All those specifications are at risk. And a good salesperson working on the other team will just walk in and point at that one thing and say, well, if there's wind here, our product is going to do better. And those sorts of salespeople are usually the most effective when it comes to changing specs. They find what
One
they
thing.
can point on and say, this is why my product is better. This is why you need to use it on this project. And they might change, one spec for one job. But if they're really good, they'll get everyone after that until somebody comes in and does the same thing against them.
Yeah.
So that in that aspect, a lot of inbound if you can establish the perspective. But in something like a commodity sale, like maybe nuts and bolts, let's just use that. Um, Lots of outbound activity to earn that trust we were talking about earlier, so that they trust you with this constant flow. Because a good contractor is buying stuff every day. I mean, they have 10 job sites, 15 job sites in a metropolitan. They need product going to all these different landing spots. So, that conversation we had earlier about if something shows up to a job site later, one thing is inaccurate, multiply that times 10 different jobs and 10 different crews. That's a lot of stress and pressure on a inventory guy or a buyer. So that is pure outbound to get to that opportunity. And usually the first opportunity isn't, hey Joe,
Isn't
we
that
need one
big?
box to this. It's not big and it's not easy, right? Like
Right.
it's never the easy one. It's always the worst possible scenario. Joe, I'm in the worst situation possible. Can you help me out? And that's where, as a building material salesperson, your availability is as long as the contractor is focused on their job.
And how many of these contractors are handing out your card to their friends?
I think a good amount actually, and that is a little bit newer to me. Probably in the last 5, 6 years, I started to understand that aspect. Where prior to that, in my 20s and early career, I was just 1,000 miles an hour. I wanted to make as much money as possible. I'm gonna retire by 40, like those types of things. Telling
Yeah.
yourself that, and eventually you realize you just can't do it yourself. So I just eventually started asking, right? Like, who else should I be selling to, Mr. Contractor? Once you get to that comfort zone, they're willing to help you. They can empathize. They understand that you're trying to do good things for your future and your family. And I was lucky enough to hit that stride at a point where I was starting to dislike sales. I was starting to grind my gears a little bit, and I was burning the engine, trying so hard, and
Yeah.
and doing it all myself. And I just started asking for help, and people were like, "Yeah, of course I have friends." Like, "Yeah, I used to work with this guy at this company, and he's now at this company. Go call him." Walk around to the office. Oh, Steve sent me over here. Oh, I love Steve. We used to play golf together. Did he tell you about his it just turns into such an easier conversation. And then once you get down to business, it's like, all right, this is what I could offer, and I just cut the line. So asking for that referral was a lesson that I didn't know, early on. But once I developed the courage and my self-confidence to ask for it, I think that became another whole network gateway for me to grow this business. And sometimes people they don't do it. They just drop off flyers or catalogs or leave
Well,
voicemails, and they don't do any of that stuff.
you forgot the most important part. You earned it,
Yeah, I guess so. And
right?
I
Because
try.
asking for it without earning it, is that a referral or a,
Yeah, that's not the same thing. So
yeah.
I do think that delineation is important. I'm glad you said that. Because I never felt like I deserved to ask until I earned it, right? Like, and maybe that's just a flaw in my psyche. As a salesperson, you want to be super aggressive, but I do want to make sure that I have something here before I start replicating it, right? Like, I don't
Yes.
want to throw something onto an assembly line that is faulty. So once you have that core of I could do this for 10 other people, that's when I start asking.
But
But you're right. Yeah, I guess you earned it.
well, that's it because you look at it in any business is a referral business,
True.
right? When people are new, if you want your kitchen done, right? And your friend had a kitchen done, do you like it? Does it look good? Was it on budget, on time? What's the guy's
Yeah,
name?
that's
Right?
right. And you're not going to have that conversation before the first kitchen's done. Right? Like, oh, I talked to this guy. He
You'll
said,
wait. Right?
yeah,
Let me see how it comes
he,
out.
he said he's going to do a good job. You should work with him too. It's a much harder conversation to have at that point. But yeah, I think if my contractor or my customer or distributor or specifier or whatever is not willing to share my contact information, then I'm not fulfilling my end of the bargain. They should want to brag. In my eyes, I want them to feel like they should brag about working with me because that means I'm doing a great job.
Yeah, great. Hey, Joe, really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
LinkedIn, Joey G123.